In his work, Human, All Too Human, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche conjectured that the idea of a spirit world, or of a metaphysical realm beyond the mundane, comes from the fact that we dream. The dead appear to us in our dreams as though they were alive, and so we wonder whether our dreams were a glimpse into the realm of the dead. Likewise, we dream of fantastic creatures, and thusly wonder whether we glimpsed into fantastic realms of gods and monsters. But if we take this deep and universal idea that dreams are a glimpse into another realm, and we consider the phenomenon of bad dreams or nightmares, we would expect to find a rich source of cosmic horror or otherworldly horror. And indeed we do, and the adventure that we're going to sketch out today draws from exactly that source. Welcome to PhD&D, everyone. I'm Dr. Bowers, and we're going to talk today about the domain of Icath, a domain inspired by, among other things, the undead hopping corpse monsters known as jiangshi, and the idea of a reality split between a waking world and a world of dreams, both of which are nightmarish. As always, with these Ravenloft videos, I'm going to give a general overview of what the domain is, and then provide a list of media, mostly films this time, which can help us get an imaginative grip on what this domain feels like and is all about. After that, we're going to sketch out an adventure that takes place in this domain, and in this case, it's going to take PCs from level 7 up to level 12, that is, up through level 11 and ending as soon as they level up to 12. So let's get started. What is the domain of Icath? Well, Icath is a ruined city, overrun with undead jiangshi, where food is scarce, and whose walls and buildings are constantly moving, ever shifting, always in disarray. This perpetual disarray is a curse on Icath's Dark Lord, Qianqiang, who attempts to escape her woes with a powerful artifact, the Nightingale Bell. Every 24 hours, the Nightingale Bell rings out, linking the dreams of all who sleep in Icath. In this single collective dream, Qianqiang rules an ideal version of the city, literally gilded in gold. Citizens who sleep must share in this dream, and although they find themselves spared the pains of hunger, they must also become wretched slaves to Qianqiang's tyranny. Thus, the citizens of Icath must choose between starvation and slavery. As for Qianqiang herself, she fears only one thing: that her monstrous daughters, warped by the Nightingale Bell's magic, might fall asleep and confront her in her perfect dream. Now, this is a very imaginative domain, and we have a few different bits of cultural media to help us get an imaginative grip on this domain. First, let's start with the hopping corpse monsters known as jiangshi. Here, I have to recommend the 2021 game Jiangshi: Blood in the Banquet Hall, not only because it's a really fun game, but also because it contains lots of interesting and invaluable lore about these monsters, as well as an informative perspective on what it was like to be a Chinese-American immigrant in the 1920s USA. The game has amazing art and a lot of talented people worked on it, and plus, in an interview with Really Dicey, link in the doobly-doo, the game's creator, Banana Chan, listed the next 3 references that I'm going to mention here. The first of these is a movie, Encounters of the Spooky Kind, or Spooky Encounters, or Encounter of the Spooky Kind, which is what my translation was called. This is a Hong Kong kung fu horror comedy from 1980. It features some scary ghosts and also some fun scenes involving a jiangshi. About a half hour in, our protagonist must find ways to avoid the jiangshi's detection and attacks, and it has a fun little bit of monster lore there. The ending is very bizarre and comes out of nowhere, but I would recommend this film. It's pretty fun. Now, building on that film and its themes is the 1985 film Mr. Vampire. This film is awesome. It features jiangshi, ghosts, lots of fun action, lots of comedy that's genuinely funny, a few genuinely tense horror moments, and the entire plot is driven by the monster lore. The 2 protagonists need to know how to stop a rogue jiangshi. Their master tells them to do such and such, but then they encounter an obstacle when they're doing such and such, so they need to ask about a backup plan. We learn that a jiangshi can't detect you if you're not breathing or holding your breath. We learn that a jiangshi's feet will burn if it walks along a path strewn with glutinous rice, and a bunch of other fun facts besides. I would recommend this movie for the monster lore itself, but in fact it is just a really fun film. I would say that this film is related to jiangshi in the same way that, say, Night of the Living Dead is related to zombies. There is a whole culture, especially in the West, about zombies. People love zombies. They love zombie games and zombie media. And in fact, there is a similar kind of following, cult following, around jiangshi. Jiangshi show up in games and movies and other popular media. People love them. And much of it, not all of it, but much of it comes from this film Mr. Vampire, which was basically a watershed film in Hong Kong cinema. It gave birth to a bunch of sequels and basically a whole genre of film that featured jiangshi. Again, kind of like how Night of the Living Dead wasn't the first zombie movie, but it certainly gave birth to a whole subgenre of zombie movies. Other than jiangshi, however, another huge part of the storytelling and the theme of Icath are Qian Chang's daughters. Qian Chang has 4 daughters, and each one is warped and turned by the magic of the nightingale bell into some kind of monstrous thing. These daughters are supposed to elicit body horror, and so it's particularly important that we have some imaginative grip on what they're going to be like. When it comes to Qian Su Mei, in her interview with Really Dicey, Banana Chan mentioned Season 1 of Channel Zero, which features a child made out of teeth. And indeed, it does, and indeed, it's horrifying. One of Qian Chang's daughters, Qian Su Mei, has this exact condition. She's made out of teeth. And all she wants is a pet fish. Aw. And while the plot of Season 1 of Channel Zero has nothing to do with Icath, is based around a creepypasta, it is worth watching the thing to just see that child made out of teeth. I watched the whole thing just for that reason, and it turned out to be pretty fun. Now, the second daughter, Qian Manyi, is made out of wood, a condition which I can only imagine is horrifying. Go ahead and check out the 2014 comic by Junji Ito, Wooden Spirit. There's only a couple of panels in there, but that's really all you need when it comes to imagining this daughter. And all she wants is just a bouquet of flowers. Very sad. The third daughter, Qian Hua Qing, is made out of mist. Now, at first, when you imagine that, you think of a ghost or something, and it's no big deal. But if you're really trying to lean into the body horror, try to imagine the idea that you can't eat because food just passes through your misty body, and you can't even breathe because air passes through your misty body too. Your lungs can't hold the air that you want. It would be an absolute state of anguish. And on that note, I would really recommend taking a look at the bloody ghost from the 2015 film Crimson Peak. Crimson Peak is not a ghost movie. The ghosts only play a very small part in the film, after all. But the way the ghosts are animated and conveyed are as spirits full of anguish, like it's painful for them just to be. And the bloody ghost in particular that appears midway through the film is one that I thought would be a nice influence for imagining Qian Waiqing. And finally, when it comes to Qian Lei An, the daughter who is covered in eyeballs, or maybe even made out of eyeballs, I went back to a 1996 anime that was based on a manga, I think, called Hell Teacher Nube, and in the 31st episode of that series, there's a story of a girl who's a violinist, and she is horrified to discover that eyeballs are appearing all over her body, and she can't stop them from appearing. It's not pitched as something funny, it's not pitched as something just quirky or awkward, it's actually presented as body horror, and I think it helps when you're trying to imagine Qian Lei An and the horror of being her. So there are some cultural influences for imagining jiangshi, there's some cultural influences for imagining Qian Chang's daughters, but what about the city of Icath itself? Well, since there are 2 versions of the city, the waking version and the dream version, we're going to have a couple different sets of influences. When it comes to the waking version of Icath, it is a dark, dreary, cloudy, constantly shifting, constantly changing structure, where people are constantly falling asleep or asleep already, unaware of most of the changes that are taking place. In this vein, I would recommend the 1998 film Dark City. And although Dark City takes place in a 1920s Western metropolis and therefore mismatches Icath, it does feature a perpetually shifting, perpetually changing city, as well as denizens who are constantly falling asleep, staying asleep, and preoccupied with concerns other than the fact that the city keeps changing. As for the ideal, golden, dream version of Icath that Qian Chang so actively rules over, we're told to imagine that the people are forced to do all kinds of tedious, drudgerous tasks, often of a microscopically minute, detail-oriented sort, polishing every single cobble along one street by hand, for instance. And while that is horrifying, I want to add a couple things to make it a little more horrifying. The basic idea is this. Normally, if you're in the dream version of Icath and you die, all that happens is you wake up in the real version, the waking version of Icath, and you suffer from hunger pangs and may be attacked by jiangshi if they're nearby. But there is a way that Qian Chang can kill you in the dream, and if she kills you that way, you don't wake up, you're gone. We're going to use this actually as a plot point in our adventure. And to get an imaginative grip on this particularly horrific way to die, We're going to first consider the 2001 Junji Ito comic, The Enigma of Amigara Fault. This is a story in which hundreds of travelers are all drawn to a certain cliff face right after an earthquake occurs. The cliff face, which was exposed by the earthquake, has dozens, if not hundreds, of human-shaped slots in it, holes that are shaped exactly like human beings. And as the story plays out, we discover that different individuals are drawn to these individually specific cavities. The people are compelled to enter these cavities, and the cavities are so shaped that once someone enters, they cannot move back, they cannot move side to side, they cannot change their position in any way, they can only scoot forward. And as they scoot forward, the space gets tighter and tighter, more and more condensed. It is absolute nightmare fuel based around claustrophobia, and it's really great, highly recommended. The other source we're going to draw on is the 1983 film Unico and the Island of Magic. I'm probably going to do a whole video on this movie because it is really imaginative, it's intended for children, and it is pure nightmare fuel. One of the many horrific occurrences in this movie is early on when a young wizard named Toby transforms a whole town full of people into clay puppets. Then, like the Pied Piper, he animates the puppets and leads them onto a ship. That ship travels to an island ruled by his master, a wizard named Lord Kukuruku, and the puppets promptly stack themselves on top of one another, forming one more wing of an outstretched, colossal, labyrinthine mansion in which Lord Kukuruku lives. A palace made of fossilized bodies. So here's how we're going to combine Amigara Fault and Unico into one narrative addition to Icath. In the dream version of Icath, if Tian Chang is unhappy with someone's work or just unhappy with them, she can, 3 times per day, point at one of the golden streets or the golden walls in her city and cause a human-shaped cavity to open up. The person with whom she is displeased is immediately compelled to walk over and enter that cavity. Like the cavities in Amigara Fault, this one does not permit the person who enters to do anything other than move forward and to become crushed. As they become crushed, as they become more and more condensed, their body turns into gold and the cavity seals. In the waking world, that person's body perishes, and thus we have the City of Dreams, constituted of dead souls. And those are the various bits of cultural media which we're going to appeal to in retaining an imaginative grip on this domain. As for our adventure, it's going to take PCs from level 7 up to level 12, and it occurs across 4 acts. In Act 1, the PCs arrive in Icath, fight some jiangshi, form an alliance with a necromancer named Yang Yu, and then get discovered by a monstrous servant of Tian Cheng. In Act 2, the PCs find themselves in the dream version of Icath, and after struggling with some of the monstrous guards there, come face to face with Tian Cheng herself. Here the PCs suffer the loss of their friend Yang Yu, and this triggers an event which drags the PCs back into the waking world. In Act 3, in the waking world of Icath, the PCs learn about Tian Cheng's daughters, and travel about Icath, finding those daughters and giving them what they need in order to fall asleep. And this is where the bulk of the adventure occurs. Finally, in Act 4, after getting all 4 of Tian Cheng's daughters to fall asleep, the PCs return to the dream version of Icath, confront Tian Cheng, and defeat Tian Cheng's monstrous servant as they make their way out of Icath's collapsing borders. So let's start with Act 1. Our first act begins with the PCs already being enveloped by the mists of the Shadowfell, the Ravenloft mists as it were. As the grey fog billows around them, they find themselves attacked by a pair of jiangshi. The PCs are only level 7 and jiangshi are level 9, so this should be a deadly or near-deadly encounter. We're doing this because we want to communicate to the players that jiangshi are dangerous monsters. These are not some little Goombas or throwaway monsters. Defeating these two should be a close call. Once the PCs defeat that pair of jiangshi, the mist will dissipate and the PCs will find themselves in Icath. Describe them looking about to see the darkened, shadowy, demolished, ruined remains of a nighttime city. The few houses still standing drunkenly lean against each other for support. And just in the distance, down a zigzag of alleys, the PCs can see a jiangshi glide by. Give the PCs a moment to adjust and explore, and then they are surprised. They are specifically surprised by a necromancer named Yang Yu, and he has, under his command, 6 jiangshi. If 6 jiangshi does not intimidate your players, make it 7. If 7 doesn't do it, make it 8. Point is, he has a lot of jiangshi with him, and after the initial fight with just a couple, this should seem to be a formidable threat. The necromancer Yang Yu warns the PCs, "These jiangshi are under my power, and it is only with the end of my life that they will stop protecting me." He immediately demands that they hand over whatever food they have. Assuming the PCs have food, and assuming that they hand it over, you will begin to devour it greedily. If the PCs refuse, of course, use the jiangshi to beat them into submission. And if per absurdum the PCs actually prevail over all the jiangshi, you can still have them stumble upon use layer later. But we'll assume that the PCs hand over their food. Now, if you're running with players who might not be receptive to this form of storytelling, you might want to use more carrot than stick. Instead of having Young show up and threaten them and demand their food and take them prisoner, you could have him show up and do the sort of come with me if you want to live thing. He could caution them that there are hostile jiangshi everywhere and that his jiangshi can protect them. He can mention that people need to stick together, that food is more valuable than gold, and that there's no time, they need to hurry up, they're in danger. Either way, Young and the PCs are going to go to Young's base. Along the way, he'll tell the PCs about Icath. He'll talk about how jiangshi are everywhere, about how rare food is, and also that if you fall asleep, you can actually avoid the effects of hunger, but at a horrific cost. So most people just try not to fall asleep. Once they arrive at Yu's base, the PCs may ask about the details of what happens when you fall asleep, and all about the dream, and about Xiansheng, and about how tyrannical she is. And the PCs here have an opportunity to take a rest, socialize, relax, adjust, and so on. At this time, they should meet Yu's animal companion, a nightingale named Biao. Biao used to be a human being, and still has a human being's intelligence. Biao can understand and read common, but unfortunately cannot speak, and cannot muster the strength to wield a pencil or pen. This will be a plot point later. After the PCs have had a chance to rest and socialize a bit, they're going to be attacked by one of Xiansheng's monstrous servants. And here we're making up a creature that is not actually in Icath as written. The center of Xiansheng's power is the nightingale bell, and in many Chinese legends there's a certain dragon associated with the voice of a bell or the protection of a bell, called Pulao or sometimes Tulao. We're going to say that the nightingale bell has such a creature. It looks like a skeletal version of a Chinese dragon, and it has the statistics of a bronze dragon. The only differences are that its alignment is chaotic evil, its creature type is undead, and it has been using its sleep breath so often that it has lost the use of its fire breath, and its sleep breath recharges on a roll of 4 through 6. And that, by the way, is why we're using a bronze dragon. A bronze dragon has a sleep breath. Our goal is to knock the PCs unconscious or make them fall asleep. And in 5th edition, there are only a few ways really to compel sleep. You can cast the sleep spell, but that's not going to work on PCs of level 7. You can cast Eye Bite, but that's sort of a one at a time thing. Or you can use a bronze dragon, which has a sleep breath in a cone. So that's what happens. Tulao, Xiansheng's servant, discovers the PCs and Yang Yu, and attacks them all and makes them all go to sleep, either by spamming his sleep breath over and over, or by attacking them until they fall unconscious. At that point, PCs level up to 8, and it's the end of Act 1. Act 2 begins with the PCs suddenly finding themselves in a gleaming, golden, perfectly clean version of Icath under a sunny sky. Their attention, however, is immediately drawn to two things. First, the crowd of peasants, hundreds of peasants all around them, busily, frantically polishing the golden cobbles of Icath's street. Secondly, and more importantly, there are a pair of tomb tappers from Rime of the Frost Maiden who are overlooking the progress of this cleaning operation. If the PCs do not immediately drop to their hands and knees and start polishing cobbles, the tomb tappers will attack the PCs. To make sure that the fight isn't unfair or unduly lethal, let the tomb tappers attack one at a time. First one of the tomb tappers attacks, and if within the first round the PCs start to make short work of it, have the second one attack too. Once the pair of tomb tappers are destroyed, or once the PCs are nearly reduced to 0 hit points, Xiansheng will arrive in an entourage. A crowd of peasants will carry a gilded howdah in which she rests, and a quartet of similar pedestals behind her, each one containing one of her daughters, will also be carried by peasants. At this point, Xiansheng will show interest in the PCs. They don't appear to be from Icath, after all. She will introduce herself, pronounce herself as Lord of this land, and, after entertaining a few questions from the PCs, will order them to get to work. If the PCs do not comply, Yang will jump out in front of them and try to absorb the responsibility. In his mind, the PCs are his ticket to survival. Now that Tu Lao has discovered his base, there's no way he's going to survive without them, and so he's risking his life to try to save them. And it doesn't work. Qian Cheng immediately causes a human-shaped cavity to open up in the golden wall of a nearby building, and as she points at Yang, and he staggers towards the opening, screaming. He begs for his life, but it is of no use. Compelled by magic, he forces his flesh into the golden walls of the building, and as the wall closes around him, the last the PCs hear of him are his muffled screams. Qian Cheng turns to gloat at the PCs, promising them a similar fate if they do not comply. But just at this moment, the PC's forms begin to flicker and fade. They are waking up from the dream. Why? Why indeed? It's because with Yang dead, nobody is controlling his jiangshi, and his jiangshi have now attacked the PCs in their sleep, so they are waking up. The PCs level up to 9, Act 2 ends, and we go on to Act 3. Act 3 begins with the PCs waking up and they're under attack by jiangshi. If the original number is too many for the PCs realistically to fight now, just say that some of them wandered away in between the time that Yang died and the rest of them attacked the PCs. Once the PCs defeat the jiangshi, they will be approached by Yu's former companion, Biao. The nightingale flutters down and frantically hops all over the table trying to get their attention, trying to communicate something to them. And here we're going to have a nice Lassie moment, you know, what is it girl, what is it, did Timmy fall down the well, sort of thing. At level 9, the PC should have many different methods of communicating with Biao, whether it's a spell or just the mundane idea of writing out an alphabet and having Biao hop at the different letters. Once they communicate with Biao, he will tell the party about Qian Cheng's daughters. Biao will say that the magic that Qian Cheng uses to maintain that collective dream also deformed her daughters in the waking world. These daughters are so warped and in so much pain that they cannot fall asleep, and yet the one thing that Qian Cheng fears is that someday they will. Qian Cheng cannot bear the thought that her 4 daughters would confront her in her perfect dream world, and if it were ever to happen, the dream would sunder, the borders of Icath would open, and the PCs, along with everyone, would be able to escape. Thus, the PCs are given a quest by this nightingale to go and find each of Qian Cheng's daughters, and to help each of them fall asleep. And here we can give the PCs some choice as to which daughter they want to find first. They can be told that Lei An is in some abandoned mansions, Xu Mei is in an abandoned marketplace called the Guahuit Center, Man Yi is in the courtyard of the Palace of Bones, which is teeming with jiangshi, by the way, and Wai Qing is in the Gemstone Gardens. The PCs can choose which one to go and investigate first, and because Icath is constantly shifting and its structure is constantly changing, we're not going to rely on a map. Indeed, I think this is why Icath has no map in the book Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Instead, we'll just let PCs make perception or survival checks in order to navigate and try to follow Biao's directions. If they pass a perception or survival check, they get to their destination without trouble. If they fail it, they are interrupted and attacked by jiangshi and must try again. So let's talk about the 4 different daughters, where they are, and what they want. Each of the 4 daughters is at one of 4 locations. Each of them, in order to fall asleep, needs something that is at another one of those 4 locations where they are not. So the PCs will probably go to one location, interact with one daughter, find out what she wants, and also pick up a different thing that they could use on another daughter to help that second daughter fall asleep. In a way, it reminds me of those Mega Man games. You know, you go to Magnet Man, and then you get Magnet Man's weapon, and you use that on Hard Man, and then, you know, so on. Beginning with Lei An, the daughter who's covered in eyeballs. She's inside a series of dilapidated but noble mansions. For a map, you could use Trollskull Alley from page 33 of Waterdeep Dragon Heist, or you could use Kir Sebal from page 70 of Tomb of Annihilation. Just make it so that the buildings are not up and down along a cliff's face, they're just all level on the ground. Lei An is made of eyeballs or covered in eyeballs, and understandably, I would imagine it hurts for her to walk. What she wants are the particularly soft funerary slippers that jiangshi wear. Now, Lei An cannot talk, none of the daughters can, but the PCs should be in some position to figure out a way to communicate with her, just like they did with Biao. And in addition to finding Lei An here, PCs can also find specters, some of which guard ghostly objects. In particular, PCs can find a group of specters that are guarding some incorporeal ghostly toys. If the PCs defeat a half-dozen specters and take one of those incorporeal toys, they can give the incorporeal toy to Wai Qing, who will then be calm enough to fall asleep. As for the jiangshi slippers that Lei An wants, well, you can find them on just any jiangshi. Next up, Sume, the daughter made of teeth, is located in the Gua Huit Center, which is basically a bazaar. Now, because this is Icath, the bazaar is abandoned, it's not functioning, it's just a bunch of dilapidated, abandoned stalls. But if you wanted a map, you could use the Sun-Cut Bazaar from page 93 of Call of the Netherdeep. That's a bazaar map. There are definitely going to be jiangshi here, and the PCs can kill one and take its slippers in order to give to Lei An. Sume, who is here, also cannot talk, but she will communicate to the PCs that what she wants is a pet fish, and that these fish can be found in the garden, or the gemstone gardens. Thirdly, Man Yi, the girl made of wood, can be found in the courtyard of the Palace of Bones underneath a willow tree. For the Palace of Bones, we could use the Temple of Heliod from page 131 of Mythic Odysseys of Theros. We'll place the willow tree in Man Yi in the entry gallery. As for the rest of the Palace of Bones, just fill it with jiangshi and communicate to PCs who are curious that in fact they can tell it's full of jiangshi. If the PCs really want to explore the palace, they can, but the writing of this adventure, at least at its base, assumes that they won't. The key to defeating Qiansheng is not to storm her palace by force, it's to use her daughters against her. Speaking of which, Man Yi cannot speak either, but she will communicate to PCs who are sufficiently innovative that what she wants are flowers from the gemstone garden. If only she had those flowers, she could rest, fall asleep. And finally, the fourth daughter, Wai Qing, is in the gemstone gardens. Now, for the gemstone gardens, map-wise, I would use the Forests of Slaughter from page 139 of Tales from the Yawning Portal in the adventure Dead in Thay. This section of the dungeon is already described in a way where the trees glow with an unnatural and magical light. You can just add that glow comes from gems that are embedded in the trees. Voila, gemstone gardens. I would have the PCs enter at area 52 and place Wai Qing in area 55 near the necromantic spring. Thematically, I would replace the displacer beasts in area 52 with 8 boneless, replace the group of peritons in area 53 with 4 strigoi, replace the 3 trolls in Area 54 with 2 Nosferatu, and replace the owlbears in Area 60 with carrion stalkers. The rest of the monsters can stay, but in areas 57 through 60, I would reduce the duration of the paralyzing effect of the trees from 1 minute to 1 combat round. Finally, remember that every pool or spring in this place contains fish that Sume might want, and every tree has blossoms that Man Yi might want. Wai Qing herself wants an incorporeal toy, which can be found in the mansions. Now, as the PCs make their way from one daughter to the next, finding various things and helping them all go to sleep, we should say that they level up once 2 daughters go to sleep, and they level up again once the other 2 daughters go to sleep. Thus, when the first 2 daughters fall asleep, they level up from 9 to 10, and when the next 2 daughters fall asleep, they level up from 10 to 11, and at that point, we proceed to Act 4, the final act. In Act 4, the PCs suddenly find themselves in the dream version of Icath. Why? Did they fall asleep? Is it an effect of something they did? Regardless, they are there, and so are the 4 daughters, equally deformed, just as monstrous as ever. I would have the PCs emerge in another crowd of peasants, perhaps with another couple of tomb tappers. Only this time, when Qiansheng arrives, there is chaos. When Qiansheng sees her 4 daughters, she begins to scream uncontrollably as they saunter towards her. Meanwhile, the perfect expressionless dream versions of her daughters immediately crumble to ash, and the entire world begins to flicker and fade as the daughters surround Qiansheng, who screams and falls to her knees. As the 4 daughters advance on their mother, there is a crack of thunder, a flash of light, and suddenly everyone is in the waking version of Icath, but the sun is shining for the first time. Chaos ensues. Everyone is running every which way, trying to escape now that they have a chance. And as the PCs take their own opportunity, or don't, they are attacked by Tulao, the skeletal bronze dragon. Tulao himself is crumbling, ribs and tiny bones are falling away from him. He swears to the PCs that he may perish as this world does, but he'll take them with him. And thus we have one final boss fight before the PCs level up to 12 and finally escape Icath. As they flee its disintegrating border, the last thing that they see is Qiansheng surrounded by her 4 daughters. And that is our adventure in Icath. What do you think? You'll notice that I involved the daughters, but there are several locations that I didn't really touch on in Icath. Would you have used them? What about the choice to add a skeletal dragon? Do you think that was for the better, or did I mess something up? And which monsters other than jiangshi would you add to Icath for the sake of variety? Thank you very much for watching. This video took quite a bit of time. I had to research a few things, I watched a bunch of stuff, and it was ultimately really fun. I have become one of these people who is now obsessed with jiangshi. Now I've got another Ravenloft video in the mix. I hope to release it pretty soon. And if you're enjoying these Ravenloft videos, by all means, please do all the internet things. Click like and subscribe, and also share it with your friends. The more people that are subscribed to this channel, the more likely it is that I can actually start doing it in a more full-time capacity. In such a case, you'll get plenty of Ravenloft videos, certainly one about every domain, and maybe some more besides. Also, maybe I'll start typing these things up and sharing them for free. How would you like that? In any case, thanks very much again, and I'll see you at the next one.